1251, the Age of the Mongols. The once scattered tribes of Mongolia, united through the will of a single man, Temujin, the Great Khan, have embarked on a conquest of the entire world that would carve the largest continuous empire in history. On the 1st of July 1251, after a complicated succession crisis, Genghis Khan's grandson, Mongke, has inherited the throne of the Mongol Empire and sworn to continue the great conquests of his predecessors. His ambitious eyes are now set on Syria, Iraq and China. During the first campaigns in China, several powerful states were crushed by the Mongol hordes. The Tangut Western Xia Empire was the first to fall in 1227, after which its population was annihilated. The Mongols' next objective was finishing off the Yuan Dynasty, controlling northern China. Its capital of Zhongdu, modern-day Beijing, had already been captured, looted and burnt down, and its population utterly slaughtered in 1215. The Jin dynasty would not survive much longer, as its final emperor, once cornered by the Mongols in 1234, took his own life. Nonetheless, the conquest of China would not be complete until one last state was crushed. The mighty Song dynasty, last Han Chinese nation, still held strong with a powerful army and an impressive network of defences. Despite its last few emperors becoming more and more disinterested, the Song dynasty was still very wealthy, and 4/5 of its budget were now dedicated to its military, ensuring formidable resistance to invasion. From Kharkorum, or Karakorum, the recently built capital of the Mongol Empire, Mongke set out to pursue the work of his predecessors and conquer the rest of East Asia. In addition to fighting the Song dynasty, a few other states would have to be dealt with. In the east, the Korean kingdom of the Goryeo dynasty, against which several invasions were dispatched. To the south, Tibet, which was promptly subdued. Nonetheless, the Dali kingdom, further south in the mountainous Yunnan region, remained. If conquered, this territory would provide a great base for attacking the Song dynasty. For this task, Mongke Khan appointed an ambitious general, eager to prove his worth. This was his younger brother, Kublai, better known in the West as Kublai. 38-year-old Kublai showed great signs of both military prowess and intellectual skills. Since his early adulthood in Karakorum, the Mongol prince had surrounded himself with foreign advisors from all over the empire: Turkish and Han Chinese, Muslims, Christians and Buddhists. Through his Han advisors, he also discovered China's central philosophy of Confucianism, to which he attached particular interest. In addition, Kublai's personal faith leaned towards Tibetan Buddhism, in contrast to the traditional Tengri beliefs of his fellow Mongols. After having been granted the whole of northern China as an appanage, Kublai followed his brother's instructions to subdue the Dali kingdom and left for the mountainous Yunnan region in 1253. The Mongol prince initially dispatched envoys to request submission, who were however promptly executed. Unfazed, he assembled his forces and designed a three-pronged attack on the country alongside seasoned general Uriankhe. Through his military talent, Kublai defeated all on his path until his army was at the gates of the city of Dali. Subsequently, local ruler Duan Xingzhi, out of resources, agreed to surrender and hand over the city. Expecting a massacre, the population watched with dread the victorious Mongol army entering Dali. However, in an unprecedented event, Kublai ensured that all souls would be spared. This decision, unusual for a Mongol, likely came from his Chinese-influenced beliefs of Confucianism and Buddhism. Kublai thus distinguished himself as a more benevolent conqueror, which was somewhat perceived as weakness by some of the Mongol nobility. By 1256, Yunnan was entirely pacified and firmly under Mongol control. With this addition, Mongke Khan judged it was finally time to conquer the Song dynasty once and for all. In 1257, the Great Khan left the capital of Karakorum for southern China to personally lead the campaign. In his absence, Mongke entrusted another brother of his, the ambitious Arik-Boka, to administer the empire in his stead. As Kublai had proved his ability by conquering the Dali kingdom, Mongke Khan put him in command of the Eastern Army in 1258 for the campaign against the Song, as he moved to besiege Jiaoyu fortress. Unbeknownst to the conquerors, the great Mongol Empire was living its final days of unity. As Kublai and his army reached the front lines, tragedy struck. During the massive siege of Jiaoyu fortress, on which much of the Song defense depended, Mongke Khan died. The Mongol Empire had lost its leader. With this political turmoil and troop morale shaken, Kublai soon stopped his offensive and decided to withdraw all local Mongol forces. This unexpected victory for the collapsing Song dynasty gave it the opportunity to re-establish peace, allowing it to further fortify its borders. As news of Mongke Khan's death reached Karakorum, it was time to assemble a Khureltai, or Mongol council, to designate his successor. Before Kublai could return to the Mongol capital in the hopes of inheriting his late brother's throne, the council was hastily organized and elected his brother Arik-Boka as new Great Khan instead, perceiving Kublai as too soft. This decision would shatter the Mongol Empire. In northern China and Manchuria, nobles opposed Arik-Boka, favouring the competent Kublai instead. His Chinese advisors convinced him to organise his own council in Shangdu, the capital of his personal territory, built by Han architects. In turn, Kublai was elected as Great Khan in 1260 in a Han Chinese influenced ceremony. The monarch announced this date as the beginning of the Zhongtong era, a typical imperial Chinese custom. As the two brothers now had to compete for control over the empire, the devastating Toluid civil war would break out. Kublai's position was however tenuous. In Mongolia and Yunnan, where many Mongol troops were still stationed, allegiance was held to Arik-Boka. The Song dynasty was rapidly regaining control over border regions, presenting a growing threat. In addition, his territory of northern China was still heavily suffering from the devastation of early Mongol conquests. Taking the initiative, Kublai assembled his forces, consisting of powerful Mongol cavalry, but mainly a collection of Jurchen, Han Chinese, Kazakh and Korean troops from the recently vassalized Goryeo dynasty, and went on to war against his brother. At the same time, he dispatched generals to take care of Arik-Boka loyalists in Yunnan who were either crushed or switched allegiance. In 1262, however, the situation would worsen for the Sinophile Mongol prince, as amidst the two brothers' war over the title of Great Khan, a subordinate Han Chinese official named Li Tan rebelled against Kublai's rule. Although this uprising was promptly crushed, Kublai's enthusiasm in the Han Chinese significantly decreased. As months went by, it became clear that Arik-Boka would not be able to prevail. Since he lost more and more supporters, he decided to eventually personally surrender to Kublai at his capital of Shangdu in 1264 and was promptly imprisoned. Kublai was now the uncontested Great Khan of the Mongol Empire. However, the Toluid civil war had left the nation shattered in several khanates, largely independent from Karakorum. The empire's capital of Karakorum had fell to ruin due to the war. Kublai's own capital of Shangdu was too small to become the new administrative centre of the empire, and ill-placed to be an effective seat of power. The Great Khan therefore decided to relocate the Mongol capital. One option was evident. 3 years earlier, Kublai had visited Yanjing, the former city of Zhongdu, which had been the capital of the Jin dynasty before it was plundered and ruined in 1215. The monarch was charmed by the area. A few small ruined palaces were still standing, and the strategic location between the Mongolian steppes to the north and the North China Plain to the south made Yanjing a particularly desirable choice. After having repaired the palaces, Kublai decided to organize the rebuilding of an immense city and make it his other capital. For this task, he appointed Han advisor Liu Bingzhong to design huge walls and plan out the future capital. This new city would be baptized Hanbalik, the city of Khans, known in Chinese as Dadu, Great Capital. Small local restoration works had already begun after the destruction of the city, but soon, immense walls were built all around the settlement. The Great Temple was built, hosting ancestral tablets of many predecessors, including Genghis Khan, for ancestor worship by the monarch, a very Chinese practice. Expanding Chinese influence, temples for ritual sacrifices, and even a temple for Confucius were also erected. The great endeavour would go on for many years, as Hanbalik gradually became the only capital of the empire. Shangdu slowly turned into the mere hunting lodge of Kublai, as well as an area dedicated for Mongol rituals and ceremonies. The Great Khan also aimed to reorganize the Mongol government based on his own cosmopolitan entourage, which had always followed him, composed of Turkic, Han Chinese and other ethnic groups. Although he greatly valued the advice given by his Han Chinese advisors, he needed to ensure the submission of the local population. To prevent them from becoming too influent, he refused to re-establish the traditional Confucian imperial examination system which had existed in China for centuries. Instead, Kublai selected officials based on merit and personal recommendation. Besides from the general population, the Han Chinese elite of northern China, although talented, could somewhat present a threat to Mongol authority, as had been demonstrated by Li Tan's uprising in 1262. The Mongol leader therefore began integrating the Han literati in his administration, however making sure to keep it away from powerful positions. Furthermore, the population was divided into three social classes. At the top were the Mongols, acting as the nobility and leaders of the empire. The Semu, a Chinese term meaning coloured eyes, referring to West and Central Asians from the rest of the empire, composed the middle class of the nation. Finally, the Han, as well as Jurchens and Koreans, made up the bottom of society. During the first years of his reign, the Great Khan strongly centralized power in Hanbalik. In addition to social and governmental reforms, he encouraged the use of paper money, another Chinese practice, and organized many tax exemptions in struggling areas to strengthen the economy. Peasants, craftsmen and merchants were all protected through varied government institutions, ensuring their well-being and flourishing. Science was also promoted, as great scholars such as Jamal al-Din Bukhari were invited to Hanbalik. The Persian astronomer reportedly brought the first globe to China as a gift to Kublai's court, and would later found the Islamic Bureau of Astronomy, or Huihui Si Tiantai, main astronomy institution of the court for decades to come. The whole military was reorganized under the Shu Mi Yuan, literally Privy Council, rather than being controlled by independent generals. This, however, brought the ire of the Mongol nobility, and Kublai was persuaded to create a separate system for Mongol troops, who by now were a minority in the very cosmopolitan armies he controlled. With his state stabilized, well organized and prospering, the Great Khan decided it was time to launch his own lineage. On the 18th of December 1271, Genghis Khan's grandson officially founded the Great Yuan Dynasty. It was named after a quote from the book of the Yi Jing, one of the oldest Chinese classics. Da Zai Qian Yuan, great is the heavenly and primal. Owing to Chinese tradition, Kublai formally claimed the mandate of heaven, becoming an emperor. The construction of the imperial palace, which would take 3 more years, was subsequently launched. By divine right, Kublai and his descendants would rule over China. The Yuan era was born. China was however not yet unified. In the south, the decaying Song dynasty was still standing. Its citadel of Xiangyang, strategically guarding the whole Song network of defences, had been under siege by tens of thousands of Yuan soldiers since 1267. Using usual tactics, they had so far been unsuccessful in capturing it. Indeed, southern China's territory, made up of mountains and rivers, including the strategic Yangtze River, was a great obstacle to the land-based Mongol armies. The river network, under Chinese control, further allowed the Song to reinforce and resupply its fortresses and strongholds. If the Mongols wanted to defeat Song China, they would have to embrace new strategies. Subsequently, in another move against the traditions of his forefathers, Kublai decided to indulge in river warfare. For this new great endeavour, the emperor ordered the construction of hundreds of ships using the expertise of Chinese and Korean sailors. Before long, a massive 5,000-strong Mongol fleet, manned by 70,000 sailors and marines, was operational. It would be the doom of Song China. By 1273, in addition to land forces and river blockades, the Mongols brought over 100 Muslim trebuchets from the Levant. Unable to withstand the combination of weapons, Song resistance began to crack. That same year, Xiangyang, which had resisted siege for 6 years, fell. From there, the Yuan fleet, bringing its war machine, sailed down the Han River into the Yangtze and would rapidly capture successive Song provinces, as local officials and generals were either crushed or defected to the Mongols. Changzhou fell in 1275, followed by Changsha in early 1276. Following his Buddhist and Confucian beliefs, and wanting to avoid the devastation that the Mongols had brought to northern China, Kublai firmly forbade pillaging and slaughtering of the population. Eventually, the Yuan forces finally arrived at the gates of Lin'an, modern-day Hangzhou, the capital of the southern Song dynasty. On the other side, all hope was crushed. 5-year-old Song Emperor Gong's regents, his mother and grandmother, took him to surrender and abdicate before the Mongols, and subsequently surrendered the city. An imperial capital for nearly 150 years, Lin'an was the most prosperous of all China at the time. Some Song loyalists refused to surrender, however, and would only be crushed 3 years later in the massive river battle of Yamen. Defeated once and for all, Song Chancellor Lu Xiaofu seized the 7-year-old child Emperor Bing and jumped into the waters, symbolically marking the end of the Song dynasty. Thus, by 1279, all of China was united under the Yuan Empire. Since they were distrusted by the Mongols, former Song subjects were integrated in the cosmopolitan empire as a new social class at the bottom of the hierarchy. A distinction was therefore created between northern and southern Han Chinese, the former being above the latter. The Yuan dynasty, stretching from southern Siberia to the island of Hainan, would flourish. In a spirit of openness, Kublai encouraged foreign traders and caravans to come to his capital of Hanbalik, or Dadu. The Mongol Conquest, by crushing quarrelling states, had opened the roads of Central Asia, allowing traders to travel relatively safely and easily between China and the West. In 1274, 2 brothers who were Venetian merchants, named Niccolo and Maffeo Polo, arrived at Hanbalik, where the proudly standing imperial palace had been completed. They had first visited Kublai in 1266, who had at the time tasked them with bringing a letter to the Pope in Rome, as the Yuan Emperor wished to extend his diplomatic relations with the West. The 2 brothers had returned with several gifts from Europe, and with their son and nephew, a 21-year-old man named Marco Polo. Kublai was greatly impressed by this new arriver and would take him in his close entourage, later appointing him to several official posts. A proud grandson of Genghis Khan, Kublai would however not be content with his conquests. Convinced to re-establish the imperial sinocentric tributary system over smaller neighbouring states, the Yuan Emperor aimed to subdue all nations around China, such as Japan, Vietnam, Burma, and even as far as the island of Java. In the last few years, the Emperor had requested submission from Japan several times without success. Insulted, Kublai therefore turned to war once more and organised the invasion of the archipelago. A first attempt in 1274 failed, in which about 13,000 soldiers, half the invasion force, perished. 7 years later, a second much larger expedition was organised, massing 150,000 soldiers and 4,600 ships. Kublai had ordered his Korean vassals to send naval experts, soldiers and admirals. After lengthy preparations, in the summer of 1281, the Yuan fleet attacked. Nonetheless, fighting on the shores of Kyushu rapidly turned into a stalemate, and much of the embarked army was unable to land. Furthermore, in an unprecedented event, an immense typhoon broke out and swept the Yuan invasion fleet. With a casualty rate of about 75%, the conquest of Japan was definitively abandoned. The Japanese, saved by the meteorological event, unusual for that time of year, were convinced they had been deliberately protected by the gods, baptizing the typhoon Kamikaze, divine wind. The golden days of the Yuan emperor had come to an end. That same year, Kublai's wife Chabi died. Much more than a simple consort, she had been a great advisor and indeed a friend to Kublai. This loss apparently greatly affected the monarch, whose health faltered. Furthermore, his eldest surviving son and crown prince, Zhengjin, a widely respected and competent figure, educated by Confucian scholars, died prematurely in 1286. Zhengjin's third son, the 20-year-old Temur, subsequently became the new crown prince. Military conquests during this period also saw limited success. An expedition to subdue Vietnam in 1284, led by Kublai's ninth son Tohon, although initially going very well, was repelled within a few months. The subsequent invasion in 1287 also ended in humiliating retreat, which led Kublai to banish his defeated son from Khanbalik. Nonetheless, the Vietnamese states of Dai Viet and Champa would later accept to become tributaries of the Yuan Dynasty to remain at peace. The Mongols were militarily successful against the Khmer Empire, which became a vassal state of the Yuan by 1285. Furthermore, Burma was conquered in 1287, after which it would have to pay tribute too. To the image of the previous Han Chinese dynasties, the sinicised Mongol Yuan Empire had effectively established a Sino-centric tributary system. The abandoning of traditions of the Mongolian steppe in favour of a Chinese way of ruling did however not sit well with many in the Mongol nobility. The very same year, Mongol Prince Nayan, a descendant of Genghis Khan's youngest brother, based in Manchuria, openly rebelled against his distant cousin the emperor. Although now 72 years old, Kublai went to lead his army into Manchuria and attacked Nayan's position. The rebelling Mongol prince's army was crushed and he was promptly executed. In the months that followed, a few minor rebellions stemming from Nayan's example broke out, but they were all easily put to an end, restoring order to the Yuan Empire. This would however be the last expedition of the emperor. The loss of his wife and favourite son had taken an immense toll on his morale, and he had by now lost interest in most state affairs, preferring to eat and drink in excessive amounts. This lifestyle, however, only caused Kublai's health to plummet. On the 18th of February 1294, the 78-year-old Great Khan of the Mongol Empire and first Yuan Emperor died in his imperial palace of Khanbalik. His grandson, 28-year-old Crown Prince Temur, was soon enthroned as his successor. In 22 years of existence, the young Chinese-like Mongol Yuan dynasty was an extremely prosperous and cosmopolitan empire. Tributes from many subjugated states came each year. Trade, by land and sea, was booming. Chinese, Korean, Tibetan, Turkic, Persian and Mongol populations lived together, though under a strict social hierarchy. Buddhism, Islam, Christianity and many other religions coexisted with little animosity. The once devastated lands of China, ravaged by horrifically violent conquests, were now prospering. Assisted by many advisors, young Emperor Tomur was now in full control of the Yuan Dynasty. Thank you for watching my video, I hope you enjoyed it. If so, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or requests, feel free to leave them in the comments section below.